Pleasure.
Hello, okay, let me say that again. Hello, I am Deb Coviello, the Drop-In CEO, and as always, I am sincerely grateful you've joined us for another episode where week after week I speak to the most amazing leaders who share their insights with you, and I do hope they inspire you. And just know I put this content out into the world because I sincerely care about partnering with C suite leaders to help them navigate challenges with confidence. And this week, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Troy Helming. He is a unicorn founder and a modern day industrialist. He's an inventor, an elite athlete, and author, and a clean energy executive. He's founded solar and wind companies that have generated more than 35 billion of economic impact, and he serves on numerous boards. He's a longtime wellness practitioner, yogi, and family man. Troy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Deb. Appreciate you having me on.
So, for my listeners, oh my God, this person is a rock star. They have done so much. He has such an interesting background. And also, I don't think I've really spoken to anybody on the show in the clean energy space. So, for me, I am sincerely looking to learn more about the opportunities and challenges, his leadership, successes and challenges, but also maybe inspire others to participate more in the lofty goals that he is pursuing. So, I will pass the mic back over to you, Troy, to share a bit about yourself.
All right, cool. Yeah. So my dad was an entrepreneur. Most of my aunts and uncles were as well. So I guess I kind of didn't have a choice. I went to college, got a business degree, and grew up in a home in Kansas City, from the San Francisco Bay Area, third generation. But my folks moved me to Kansas when I was 5. And it was a solar powered house, and I thought solar was pretty cool. My dad put it in. He's very conservative politically, but he's like, yeah, I want energy independence. Didn't want to put a new big natural gas line in. And so in 1980, he put a solar system in, and one of my chores growing up was maintaining that. But there weren't any jobs in solar or clean energy when I got out of business school in 1990. And so I went to work for AT&T, did the corporate thing for a couple of years, and then left to start my first company, a telecommunications infrastructure company, and haven't. I guess I've been unemployable ever since. Haven't been able to go back and get a real job. That's just not my thing.
It's interesting. I think about my husband as well. He has always worked in a family business. He's third generation painting and decorating contractor, and he had some brief stints in corporate, and he just wasn't good. It just wasn't good enough. He was always complaining. It was always about him being in control, him being the boss, and being able to guide the ship. So I sincerely appreciate that, and now I am one of those. It would be very hard for me to ever go back into corporate after completely owning our future. But that was rather short. There are so many other things that you've done. Tell me more.
Yeah, okay, sure. So I'm the CEO and founder of EarthGrid. This is company number 8. So I've had 6 exits and 1 failure. And of the exits, 2 were really small, 4 were meaningful, and one of them became a Deca unicorn. Trade Wind Energy, which I started, it was originally Kansas Wind Power, started that in the 1990s, almost 30 years ago. And it became Enel Green Power, and it's now a $35 billion division of Enel Green Power. It was the largest wind farm developer in the United States in 2017 and number 2 in 2018. However, I sold most of my shares long before that, so I can't take full credit, although I did hire the executive team that stayed on until the company exited. But I switched to solar, started a solar company about 15 years ago, and it became one of the largest developers of community solar projects. And at one time, approached the unicorn valuation, kind of up and down, as we call it, the solar coaster. But yeah, I've been in clean energy most of my career, and also wrote this book, The Clean Power Revolution, 20 years ago. Please don't buy it; it'll put you right to sleep. So
Okay.
for any of your listeners, but in the book, I talk about how we need 270 new transmission lines to unlock the really cheap solar and wind power in rural parts of America, mostly red states, pretty much all red counties, is where we're building, between 50 and $100 billion a year worth of new solar and wind farms because they're the cheapest forms of new energy. But a lot of those projects never get built because of lack of new transmission lines. So out of the 270 lines I said we need, our country's only built about two in the last 20 years.
Fascinating. I did not know about that. And I know we're going to talk a bit more about this, but when I think about this, hey, I'm just going to open up a company, I'm going to hire people, and we're going to deploy this stuff. And oh, by the way, a little issue about transmission lines, but it's been a challenging industry. I think everybody at their heart realizes it is a tremendous source of energy. It's one of your major goals here, but there's a lot of challenges other than transmission lines. What other challenges in your ecosystem are there to move this forward?
That's primarily it. It's the antiquated grid. I mean, the economics are already there. They weren't when I started. I mean, when I started almost 30 years ago, I was getting death threats and, Florida Power and Light built the first wind farm in Kansas. I was like, that's weird. Why is a Florida company doing wind here? It should be done here locally. So I started the first local wind farm company. But yeah, the economics are there. Permitting is sometimes challenging, more so for wind. Solar, you can hide it pretty well by putting up, fences or vegetation or whatever. But wind turbines, they're massive. You can't hide those. And so permitting can be a bit of a challenge. But the biggest challenge, again, is interconnection to the grid. And our antiquated grid, we built the biggest machine in the world in the United States, mostly in the 1950s through the 70s. And we haven't really done much in the way of upgrading it. So 80% or 4 out of 5 wind projects and solar projects never get built because of the antiquated grid, lack of transmission capacity. So I'll ask you a quick question. Outside of the energy or the power business, very few people know the answer to this. But if you had to guess, how long typically does it take to permit and build a new overhead transmission line in this country?
I'm just going to take a wild guess. 10 years? I don't know.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
really accurate. The average is 10 to 15 years in this country, and
Why?
that's because of
Why?
why? It's because of NIMBYs and bananas. Have you heard of those terms?
I have not. Please educate me.
NIMBY is not in my backyard. Bananas are build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. So these are people who are well organized, very vocal, who don't want a new overhead power line going through their community because they're worried it's going to lower their property values or cause cancer for their kids or whatever, right? And it doesn't take much in the way of money or time for them to influence to slow or stop a project or file a lawsuit. And this is why it takes 10 to 15 years. And by the way, that's 10 to 15 years for the projects that actually succeed. Something like 90% of them get killed along the way, meaning, there's one community that says no or heck no. And the developer, after spending sometimes tens of millions of dollars, finally just has to walk away from the project.
So then let me ask a broader question, given that tactically, because people don't understand, not NIMBY and banana are impacting it, but there must be some greater legislative, economic, political, or some other influencing scheme that we have to address at a high level that may pave the way. Because I know in business, I'm a barrier buster. I keep asking questions: why and who, why and how, what's the opposition? Let's work that angle, build alignment and consensus so we can move forward because here's the mutual benefit. What else needs to be done to be able to advance or accelerate this work?
Right. Well, first of all, let me relate to you there a bit. I'm also a barrier buster, overcoming obstacles. My sport of choice, you mentioned in the intro that I'm an elite athlete. I've competed on that NBC hit show, American Ninja Warrior. 4 times they invited me to compete, but and just a few months ago competed in world championships and did pretty well. Even at my young age of 57. But so my sport of choice is overcoming obstacles, and I've been doing that for decades in the infrastructure space, right? What are the obstacles? So if someone wants to build a new natural gas line, the federal government imposed legislation many years ago that allows for eminent domain, meaning, the gas developer working with the state government or county or city can use eminent domain to force the issue and put a new natural gas line in. People are very unhappy when that happens, even though they get paid a fair market, value for it. But at least the project can get done that way. There's no such legislation for power lines. And so that means it's left to the state level. And if it's a multi-state transmission line, which many of them need to be, because wind is so cheap, solar is so cheap. I mean, it's like um, coal is like 4 times more expensive. Natural gas is like 2 to 3 times more expensive, and nuclear is like 5 to 10 times more expensive if you include all of the the government costs and subsidies and things in there. So anyway, don't take my word for it. The numbers are there. Tons and tons of utility papers and researching. So that's why utilities are building so much solar and wind in the last 5 years. It might surprise you and your listeners to hear that of all the new power plants built in the last 5 years, 85% are solar, wind, and batteries. 85%. Why? Because of economics. So they're finding these developers are out there finding places where there's enough room on the grid, or maybe the factory is nearby or the data center is nearby. And now we have this, this massive increase of electric demand because of the electrification of everything, vehicles, heating in homes and businesses, industrial processes. They're electrifying because it's just cheaper to use electricity than anything else, gas or whatever. And so that means, and with the demand from AI and data centers, they're saying that the grid's going to have to increase by 2x. And then you add everything else, it's 3 to 5x. That means the largest machine ever built in the world, the electric grid, has to be increased by up to 5x. How in the world are we going to do that if we can't build new transmission? So that's why I started EarthGrid 8 years ago, and I invented the plasma tunnel boring robot to be able to affordably bore tunnels underground and put transmission lines underground, which is more common in other parts of the world. But in the US, for whatever reason, we still put most of our power lines above ground.
So, given these challenges, and you're very educated, and I think you know how to navigate the landscape, like what keeps you going? Because it seems so daunting that it is just so hard. And I'm sure people willing to invest and do the hard work. Yes, the economics is there, but it just takes so long and it's so hard. What keeps you going? What's your drive?
Yeah, well, I want to accelerate energy independence, cleaner energy, clean up our air and our water to have, less pollution going out there. And this is not a political thing for me. I think we can all agree that
Yes.
infrastructure is something that we need, right? And cleaner air, cleaner water, cleaner food. I think we can all agree with that. So that drives me to an extent, partly because my mom died of a form of bone cancer, and she had a lot of toxins growing up, in living near. Anyway, I won't get into all that, but so cleaner air, that drives me. But putting the power lines underground, we can actually get them approved and built in 1 to 2, maybe 3 years, rather than the overhead solution of going, of 10 to 15 years. So that's what gets me excited is lowering our energy costs as a nation, making our nation more competitive, and eventually the world, by lowering energy costs.
I just the way I feel right now, I mean, I'm just so grateful that I'm interviewing somebody like you and bringing your story forward. I think we have to have more conversations and understanding about innovation, and rather than believing just what maybe political narratives might say about certain things, we need to have a very robust conversation, understand the value of what you're trying to do, so you can get more people on board. I'd love to switch and go back in time. You had talked about, I've done 6 or 7 exits here, and this was, the a la carte of what they were, but and I had one failure. Tell me about the failure, because I'm an optimist and I always look at things as what did we learn?
Yeah, so that was a company called Crystal Energy, and it had a sub brand called Crystal Planet. And I formed the company in, when was that? 2004, I believe. After I had exited the first wind farm company that I started, which was my second company. So this was company number 3. And frankly, we were just ahead of our time. The business model was to sell both products and services for energy efficiency to help people save money. Better light bulbs, switching away from, expensive and hot incandescent bulbs to, LEDs and CFLs back then, things like that. And like I said, we were just ahead of our time. The margins were too thin, and although the adoption was steadily increasing, it wasn't enough to overcome the thin margins.
Okay, so we live and learn and we move on. That's fine. Because again, if it weren't for innovators trying new things, I think I've heard for, every 99 failures, you get one success, and people think you're an overnight success. Like, well, no, I learned a lot along the way. So kudos for you. You're such an interesting person. When I was looking at some of your bio, I heard, I see also that you're dabbling in a TV series and movie script. I would love to know more about that. You
Oh,
must do that in the 25th or 26th hour of the day.
yeah, well, that's not me. That's more my wife. She's a best-selling novelist, Alicia Helming. She was my co-founder at Trade and Wind Energy and also Pristine Sun, but she's super creative, so she pursued her passion there, and she wrote and collaborated with a number of Hollywood people in the Hollywood industry to write a script about part of our story. Like for example, I think I may have mentioned earlier, but I used to get death threats when I was developing wind farms in the Midwest. My picture was up on a dartboard, so some pretty interesting stories there about, the, I guess the nascent beginnings of the clean energy industry in this country.
Okay. Very, very interesting. Again, you're so diverse. And now, what I want to do though is now shine a light on the work that you're trying to do. When we think about your goals, you were very prescriptive on your website. You said get the US to 90% clean energy by 2035, upgrade the creaky, inadequate electrical grid, and transition to infrastructure 2.0 worldwide and sustainably. How are you going to do that? And who do you,
Yeah.
and how do you and because if there's any listeners out there that might have some connections, I want to make sure I support you. So how do we do that? Where are you at in the journey?
Sure. So it's been EarthGrid is how I'm going to do that. So the tech that I invented, you can kind of see for those who are watching. There's a plasma torch behind me here, but basically we create a miniature sun by creating lightning in a tube, and we pass air at sonic speeds over that lightning. The air superheats up to 27,000 degrees Celsius, so it's a little miniature sun at the end of it, and that basically turns the rock into sand and gravel. And we use the inputs are air, which is free, and electricity, which is now cheap thanks to the proliferation of solar and wind, right? And so electricity is doing the work that used to be done by drill bits and chemicals and humans and mechanical machines and things like that. So it's faster, it's cheaper, it's up to 100 times faster, and anywhere from 3 to 10 times cheaper than conventional boring and drilling and tunneling technology. All right, so that's the underlying enabling tech. And then EarthGrid has been approved as a telecommunications utility in 46 states and counting. And that means as a telco utility, we get preferred and in some cases near guaranteed access to the public rights of way under roads. Can't go under somebody's house without their permission, but we can go under the roads. So it's a state road, county road, or city road, just like AT&T, Crown Castle, American Tower, Verizon, Comcast, whatever. We can put our conduits under those roads, and it's a fast, cheap process. And the NIMBYs and bananas have very few, in fact, in most cases, no opportunities to slow us and stop us. So we announced publicly, we were able to finally announce it after 20 months of negotiating. We closed a huge joint venture deal with a sovereign wealth fund, the Enertech, which is a part of the Kuwait Investment Authority, the oldest sovereign wealth fund in the world. Kuwait's a longtime U.S. ally, has the world's second biggest oil field, and they have publicly, I think they state $2 to $3 trillion of assets under management. They've agreed to invest in US projects initially, and then eventually Canada, Europe, other parts of the world, and of course the Middle East. But it's $18 billion to build a coast-to-coast network of tunnels using our technology to put power, fiber, water, and freight tubes in those tunnels.
I am floored
It's
by the
crazy.
tech and the opportunity.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. When the idea came to me 8 years ago, I was like, could this be real? And just couldn't stop thinking about it. And now I truly believe that we're going to change the world.
And again, it is my honor to have you on the show and share your story with me. Now, I don't know if my network can help you, but if you had to qualify, who else do you need to connect with, or who do you need to educate in order to support your enabling technology? Who are you looking for? I want to just give you that opportunity. I'm sure you
Yeah,
got people, but go.
we do. Yeah, we have a big pipeline of potential customers and projects, but we're working with dozens of utilities that want to bury their power lines to make them more resilient in the event of hurricanes and ice storms and stop causing fires and killing people. The biggest fire in Texas recently was caused by overhead power lines from Xcel Energy. It's a common story. So anyway, so utilities that want to bury their infrastructure, make their grid more resilient, and solar and wind and other power producers that want to get their power to market because there's no transmission line, so we can be their underground extension cord. Construction companies that have tough projects, putting in a gas line, a water line, sewer, stormwater, whatever, and the rock is hard and it's causing problems. So those are kind of the key customers. We're not really working with governments as customers. We're working with governments as for our rights of way to get access to the roadways. But our customers are pretty much all private, with a couple of exceptions. We are working with the U.S. Department of Defense to help make their infrastructure more resilient against kinetic strikes from an adversary.
Um, I'm just, I'm so in the moment here. It's like I'm losing my track for the next question. But are you still getting death threats or is that in the past?
No, that's been many, many years. Thankfully, no, I'm
Yeah.
not.
Because it's one of those things that I start thinking about. And in fact, I was discussing with a potential guest on my show that's pretty prominent that I said, do you have security detail? Because anybody that has any connection with, I don't know, I don't even want to say it, but like adversaries to what you're doing that don't want to see you succeed, I start thinking about how do we, as individuals, protect ourselves, our livelihood, and as well as our families around us. I don't know if that was a concern for you anymore, especially for the kind of work that you're doing.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, again, I think most people agree that the world needs better infrastructure, and we're just construction technology that can make it happen faster. And we happen to have a business model where we're going to own some of this infrastructure. Is it going to cause disruption? Yeah, it will. But I don't know that it's going to be so acute that other industries are going to get to ticked off about what we're doing.
So
I
you've
hope
been
not.
wildly successful. I'm so wowed by the work that you're doing. But when we think about, I don't know, I want you to share with me maybe some advice based on maybe an example or a story with CEOs or C-suite leaders. You've seemed to have been brave, you know, blazing new paths, but certainly you've learned some things along the way that maybe you can share some insights for C-suite leaders now, or maybe those who are trying to climb the ladder.
Yeah, sure. One of my favorite little nuggets of wisdom is the wolf that chases two rabbits goes hungry.
Go on.
And so, yeah, in particular with a startup, with a big corporation, you're chasing a number of rabbits because you have teams that can do that. But in a startup, there's this inevitable opportunity creep where a customer or an investor will say, "Hey, have you thought about doing this? Why not do that?" And so you're like putting some time and resources into that thing. It's a revenue opportunity, but your core business is over here. If you're trying to do both as a startup, you're ultimately going to do a poor job of doing both. So stay focused on the one thing, your core business, get that going to where you're cash flow positive and ultimately making some profit before you start branching off and chasing other rabbits.
And then I guess my next question is that, you have a background in entrepreneurship, but you're disrupting. There's a lot of innovation, and there must be a lot of naysayers or barriers in the way of what you're trying to do. Um, how do you stay focused? Because I think for business leaders that are in a corporate environment, sometimes the challenges, the external barriers against something keep people from taking risks. And it seems like you're taking risks every single day. I mean, how do you keep going? Because there's so many people that are risk averse.
Yeah, that's a real thing. And it's not something that you're necessarily born with. And so for me, I've had to kind of hone that skill, if you want to call it, over the years. And so initially it was rock climbing. You can kind of see a picture. My son and I climbed the Grand Teton in Wyoming this summer. I've been doing rock climbing for about 30 years off and on. And if you go to a rock climbing gym or a Ninja Warrior obstacle gym, which I'm spending a lot more time on the last 5, 6 years, in either case, you fail a lot, right? You go to a climbing gym and you have to, be cerebral about it, figure out, okay, how am I going to get through this route if you're bouldering or climbing top rope, lead climbing, whatever. And you fail, right? You fall off, you try it again, you keep going, you keep going. So that kind of builds that muscle of being okay with failing and trying, over and over. It doesn't matter if you fail. What matters is, are you going to get up and try it again? And same thing with Ninja Warrior. Sometimes I'll fail 5, 10, 20 times on an obstacle before I finally figure out how to get through it. Sometimes I have to get stronger, the grip strength, the this, whatever. So you keep going back week after week and you build up those kind of weird muscles that you don't always use. And so you're stronger physically, but often it's mental. You have to figure out a different way through the obstacle, smashing those barriers that you talked about earlier, Deb. So for me, that helps because when people say, "Oh, this sounds like science fiction. That's crazy. That's not going to work," it just kind of brushes off. Be the palm tree and bend in the wind. Don't break, and keep going. So I would encourage the listeners to find something in your life where you have to fail repeatedly so you can build that muscle so that it doesn't bother you as much to take that risk.
Oh, that is such great insight. I sincerely appreciate that. And for me, it's inspiring because I'm still moving along the path of building a business, reaching more people, and I have tried many things. In the beginning, it was like what the gurus said, and then you hear like, "Oh, don't try that." And then it's at some point I say, "Wait a second. I know where I'm going. I just have to figure out how I'm going to get there."
Right.
And it's the long game. If anybody says that, they're an overnight success, they don't talk about the 19 years that led up to year 20 when all of a sudden they look successful. So for my listeners, I just want to encourage you. I mean, I'm grateful to have had Troy on the show to share his resiliency and his vision for, infrastructure for the US. But on your level there, you should be thinking about what do you feel so passionate about, whether it's personal or professional, and just keep going. Don't listen to the naysayers. Take information and input and see what you can learn. But if you know there is a better way or an innovation to be had, just keep going. And that is my inspiration from this conversation with you, Troy.
Oh, thank you, Deb. No, I appreciate it. And I guess I'll just echo that by saying that whatever you're doing, whether it's your own company or your job or personal life, if you're doing something you're passionate about, if you have the power of purpose, great book, by the way, then you'll have that extra energy to get up and go when inevitably you get knocked down. And I've been knocked down so many times in my life, and so many little, the one company failure, but so many little failures and mistakes along the way. We all do it. Don't beat yourself up, right? That's just part of growth, part of learning, part of life. But if you're passionate about whatever it is you're doing, that's, in my opinion, the key that you need to get through those dark times.
And before we get off, what's the name of your dog in the background? He's been so good.
Zeus.
What? Zeus?
Zeus. Yeah,
Oh, he's your business partner, your office
that's right.
partner.
Yeah, he's my security right there.
Very cool. So I really want my listeners to go visit you personally as well as the work you do. And if you happen to know anybody that might be of value for Troy's network, please reach out to him. So how can people get a hold of you?
So my social media handle is Solar Ninja Troy because I was in the solar business for decades, and I've been around solar since 1980, over 40 years. So Solar Ninja Troy. You can find me on LinkedIn or email troy@earthgrid.io for input output.
All right, Troy, I just want to say thank you so much for being an amazing guest, and I want to wish you well and continue success with these amazing goals.
Thank you, Deb. Thanks for having me, and thank you for listening, everyone.